Good morning, folks. How are we doing? I am Scott. That is Bo rumbling around down there below me someplace. Today's the 22nd, 22nd day of February 2022. It is 02222022. For those numerology folks out there, that's my numerology grift for you. I was surprised. I saw yesterday that Uncle Hotep is doing Twitch gamer streaming. It's like, goddamn, is there a grift this guy doesn't fucking do? Good for you, man. Anyway, today we're going to talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about fracking. We're going to talk about what Russia is doing or not doing or threatening to do. And I'm going to talk about why we're there in the first goddamn place. But before we do, Canada's Parliament held a vote last night at 8 p.m. on whether or not they should continue with the Emergencies Act for another 30 days. And they voted in favor of it by about 30 fucking votes. And I was, I can't say I was shocked, but, I really thought that the Liberal Party would be smarter than that. But I guess it all depends on who's paying their fucking ticket, right? So the Emergency Act stays in place for 30 more days, which gives the banks more opportunity to seize more people's fucking money. Folks, in 2006, Aaron Rousseau told you. He was talking about a chip in your hand. They haven't got to that point yet, but they were trying it and they were testing it during the goddamn Rona fucking crisis. But, the point of the chip was if they don't like what you say, if they don't like who you support, they'll fucking turn your shit off. Well, the banks are turning people's shit off because they didn't like what people donated money to. They didn't like their opinions. And they wanted to send a message: if you financially support things that oppose what we're doing, well, just turn your chip off. And that's what they did. And folks are like, oh my God, it's the fucking liberals. Oh my God, it's the fucking left. It's the banks. When are you going to get that through your fucking head? And the banks own all of them. Now, here's a prime example right here. Tulsi Gabbard. She always has to sit in this fucking orientation, looking slightly over from. And she's got to have her head at a certain angle. It's like she's a fucking. It's like she's a goddamn CGI. I don't fucking know. These people pay. And she's one of them. These people pay someone to come in there and tell them exactly how to sit, exactly how your hair should fall and drape across your fucking thing, exactly what should be behind you in the fucking corner. Here's this fraud, Tulsi Gabbard. She's speaking at CPAC, by the way. For all you progressives out there, you still fucking support her. She's speaking at CPAC, and she's on the Hannity show. And, of course, Hannity has been calling for the full-on invasion, our invasion, of fucking Russia. Not Russia, but fucking Ukraine, to save those Ukrainians. Even though they've also been fucking bitching and moaning about how fucking Nancy Pelosi wants to defend the borders of Ukraine, where they won't defend the borders of the United States. But for some reason now, because war is involved, Fox News wants to fucking promote and get people like Hannity, that smug dumbass fuck, to promote the notion of, well, fuck that. Biden's a pansy. We should go out there and fucking invade. We should just invade Ukraine and keep the Russians out. Okay. By the way, this is today's Ukraine conflict map. These are all the same thing. They all say the same thing. 2 Ukrainian servicemen killed, 18 wounded. 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 These maps were taken over because they're useful and they're ways for people to understand what's going on. And now they're run by people who are on obviously one side or the other. These are instances of shelling from the Ukrainian military to the people of Donetsk and fucking Lugansk. They are shelling kindergartens, as I showed you, apartment buildings, as I showed you, but they don't list any fucking casualties on the Donbass people's side, the ones who are being shelled. The only fucking casualties so far, 2 Ukrainian servicemen killed, 18 fucking wounded. And that's all that fucking matters to them. Even though these bombs are being launched in another violation of the Minsk Agreement by the Ukrainian government that the 2 Ukrainian servicemen worked for and the 18 Ukrainian servicemen worked for. But they're the only ones that matter. So that tells you something about who's running this shit and how fucking reliable it really is. But as you can see, even they have to admit, because the OSCE, you have to admit that the OSCE, because the OSCE is reporting them. So they have to admit to them. So there's already an invasion underway. It's just being done by our proxies. And of course, U.S. drones are also involved in this. You didn't know that, but there you have it. U.S. drone strikes are also involved in this. Let's jump real quick into Russia. Russian Parliament has ratified the Donbass Agreement. Part of that agreement, that's what he signed when he said that Putin recognized that they were separate entities from Ukraine at this point, and that that allows them to do a number of things. Because they recognize them as a separate nation, they can then send in peacekeepers or separatists, as what happened with Georgia back when, as per our fucking dictates, the Georgian military shelled the separatists there and killed a couple of Russian peacekeepers, which caused big problems. Now, since that has happened, since Parliament in Russia has ratified the agreement, they are now, according to this, they are now in a position where they can start developing plans for military bases in Donbass. Also, because that's part of the agreement. Also, they can send in peacekeepers, as in with Georgia, because it is a separatist breakaway fucking nation state. All that, take it for what it's worth. But when you have a nation doing that to its own people because they don't want to be part of your fascist fucking U.S.-backed state, does the right to protect creep into this fucking situation? I don't know. But that's a lot of fucking shelling. Even though apparently, according to this, nobody from Donbass is being hurt, even though the shelling is coming entirely from the Ukrainian military. I want to show you something. And I will post these both on, I haven't posted anything on Substack for a while. I'm going to post these on Substack because this is obviously something that's taking place now, and There's good reason to look back on this and try to understand better what we're talking about. This is something I wrote in 2014. And by the way, I do mention the fact that Joe Biden's son was put on Burisma's board. I wrote about that shit in July of 2014. For those of you who were interested. Flight MH17, Royal Dutch Shell, in the Azovsky shale gas field. What could it mean? Let me read a little bit for you. I've taken info from a number of graphics and tried to compile them into one little map so folks can get a better idea of yet another stunning coincidence in the supposed downing of Malaysian airline flight MH17. There are lots of people with good reason to focus on the story of Joe Biden's son being on the board of Burisma, the energy conglomerate with a lot invested in Ukrainian liquid natural gas development. There's another rather striking anomaly surrounding the downing of flight MH17 that's seemingly flying under the radar, if you'll pardon the pun. That little oddity of which I write is the fact that Malaysian airline flight, with a vast majority of passengers from the Netherlands, just happened to fly off course by a large amount right over a known conflict zone and right near a crucial area for a company based out of the Netherlands, Royal Dutch Shell. This is the casualty count. 193 of the 298 were from the Netherlands. It's also being reported, backed by artillery fire from the illegal government in Kiev, the Ukrainian military just happens to be assisting a certain company in a rebel-controlled area set up their fracking and drilling equipment in a big rush. Yes, that company is the same company, Royal Dutch Shell. For those of you who don't know, this is a map of the major shale oil deposits in Ukraine. And this is the one there's more up here. There's more on this side over here. There's actually a couple that's been discovered on a kind of a river of reserves for fracking, running all the way up through here now. But this was the main one. This is the one that Royal Dutch Shell put a bunch of money into. Chevron put money into this one, and the one up here I'll show you in a second, that's where Burisma is. Or these little small ones up in here, but these are the big ones. These are the big ones. This is the one we're talking about. And this, of course, is the Donbass region here. Lugansk up here, and Donetsk down here. This would be Lugansk, these two, and this is Donetsk. Or this one, and this is Donetsk. This is the field we're talking about that Royal Dutch Shell put $10 billion into. When? 2013. Let me show you that real quick. Just so you don't think I'm making this shit the fuck up. This is an article from Al Jazeera talking about the same thing. This was 2014, but here's one 2013 in January, talking about Royal Dutch Shell. The largest oil company in Europe, has signed a contract to drill for natural gas in Ukraine. Signed it with the president, Viktor Yanukovych, that we got rid of in 2014. Put a neo-Nazi fucking regime in place. We did that because Yanukovych was refusing to sign up with NATO, and I'm thinking the European Union for some reason. He was dragging his feet about it, but he was also making closer and closer inroads with Russia. Of course, he knew Russia did not want him to join fucking NATO. He thought that was a bad idea. So we regime changed him. after we regime changed him, and the neo-Nazis, which I'm not making this fucking shit up. Here's Al Jazeera, and they're talking about the same fucking thing. After we regime changed them, and we used neo-Nazis to a large degree to do that, and we installed a puppet regime, the people in fucking Donbass, they wanted no part of it. They certainly didn't want any part of it. Bibi was talking to, she knows more about fucking the history of Ukraine than I do. But I don't think she knows that much about this history, particular history. That she'll explain to you that there's a divide in Ukraine because during the occupation there were a percentage of a good percentage of the population stood with fucking Nazi Party and with Germany, and opposed the Soviets. And the people who were in fucking Ukraine, had been born and raised in Ukraine, were Ukrainians, but with Russian, were ethnically Russian. So there's a conflict that's been there for really even before the fucking World War II, but it's certainly dating back to World War II. Well, that conflict still exists, and it existed in 2014 when they didn't want any part of our puppet regime that we installed there. Now, this is how much of it was. So here's Lugansk and this is Donetsk. This is the two areas involved that have broken out. At first, this was all they controlled. And this other article that I did here, I did this map showing you how it began. This is a map. This is an article I did in July 28th, 2014, talking about the crash site and where this conflict was. Now, here's the map, the area of rebel control as of June 19th, 2014. And here, of course, is the fracking field. And the crash takes place here. Why is that important? It's important because they wanted control of all of this. And so they downed the plane. They deliberately flew it off course right over top of here. They downed the plane in an area where they would have to come in. The government of Ukraine would have to be allowed to come in by the rebels and push this conflict line all the way back here so that it gave them access to the full fucking field. And as I said before, when they did that, as they rushed in, they set up all their fucking, started setting up quickly their fracking fields. And that's how that conflict went out. And that was July 25th. So it went from July 19th to July 25th, 2014. I'll post these on my Substack thing. You can find a link to my Substack thing down there. It's very good, I think. My opinion at the time was it was the accident, the crash itself was staged. That didn't actually go all the way down. And I had good reason for that. All of the fucking wreckage was right next to a fucking road. It was handled. The cleanup and the first people that were there were actually employees from a British-owned mining company that was there. And it just happened to crash right near that. So they were the first ones on the scene. There's a lot of fucking discrepancies with what happened there. But whatever happened, it doesn't really make much of a difference. The reality is it was the location of that crash that made the difference for them. Because as I showed you, they wanted to get in there. They wanted to push the conflict line back. And they wanted to get in there and start setting up the fracking, which they did immediately. So we see that in 2013, they signed the fucking fracking deal. It wasn't just Royal Dutch Shell. It was also, now Burisma had already been there, but Burisma got access to some shale fields in Lugansk due to the conflict, and so they were allowed to go in there and frack for a while. It was Royal Dutch Shell, which is partly owned by the royal family of Britain, and it was fucking Chevron. Two different fucking contracts, both of which, by the way, have since canceled those contracts. Not entirely sure if anybody even or has signed deals with Donbass or Donetsk government to start fracking in those areas. However, if they haven't, as some people have pointed out, it is a silent victory, really, for Russia. This was written in 2015, around the same time when Shell and Chevron both pulled out, according to the long tailpipe here. Shell and Chevron both, this is July 11th, 2015, June 11th, 2015. Shell and Chevron pull out a fracking deal with Ukraine, citing the war with separatists and the situation with Russia. As you can see here, this basin now extends, at least in 2015, all the way up. They've got this big ass field, but you've got this area here, you've got this area here, and of course the conflict is here. Russia was really kind of the big winner in all of this. However, now it will be the people of Donbass, if they can hold their fucking separatist breakaway country or their area. There is a constitutional clause in Ukraine, which states specifically that the natural resources of the nation belong to the people of the nation, and they must be compensated adequately for businesses coming in and extracting those resources. So I'm not entirely sure how Yanukovych back in 2013 and 2014 respected that. I don't know how our puppets, I can imagine how our puppets fucking railed against that when we installed them, which of course would make things even more profitable for Chevron and fucking Royal Dutch Shell. But they both made $10 billion investments, which they sought to lose. But they in 2015, obviously, they were going to lose. So those resources, and they're not insignificant. I mean, I think both of them, one was $8 billion to $11 billion in the one in Donbass. $8 billion to 11 billion barrels, cubic yards. 8 billion to 11 billion cubic yards of liquid natural gas was the estimate per year, annually, that could be dragged out of that fucking ground. Of course, we know what fracking does to the environment, to aquifers, to making things unstable in terms of earthquakes. It just ruins the fucking, and then what the runoff, what the hydraulic fracking does, what the hydraulic runoff does to the environment. It's just nasty. It just ruins the fucking countryside. So, don't know who's, if anyone's, accessed to that fucking pot of gold at the end of the rainbow or not. I seriously doubt anyone has, especially with all the conflict going on, all the fucking shelling going on. But we will see. But that is where it stands now. People say that Russia is just poised and ready to invade. They're not. However, legally speaking, they are now at least better positioned to give the order to go ahead and send people in. Like I said, part of that contract or part of that deal they struck with the Donbass region allows for them to place military bases inside Donbass, which of course would be the end of the fucking story. And if they bring in peacekeepers, that will also be the end of the fucking story. Now, they claim that there'll be sanctions and whatever the fuck they're going to do. And that's all well and good. And I'm sure that's all well and good. But, you know, just because the people of the United States don't see what's actually happening and what the fucking Ukrainians, our puppet government, is doing to the people of Donbass, doesn't mean everybody in the world isn't saying it. Everybody in Europe isn't saying it. So I'm not sure how many people are going to actually sign up, how many different nations are going to actually sign up on these ridiculous fucking sanctions. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't seem to be behind them. But all Tulsi Gabbard pushed back on was, well, they haven't invaded yet. She didn't mention the fact that, you know, hundreds of people have been killed so far by fucking Ukrainian military shelling their own goddamn people. And that if anyone does come in from Russia, there'll be Russian peacekeepers trying to stop the shelling and stop the fucking killing. She doesn't mention any of that. And of course, she's going to CPAC, so she's, I guess, she's going to reinvent herself as a Republican because she didn't win as fucking a Democrat. Would be my guess. Anyway, that's where that situation is, and that's part of how it got to where it is. I just thought you should know. Like I said, I'll be processing this, and then while I'm processing this, I will go ahead and post up my 2 articles. I've got many more articles on what happened in Ukraine during the President Peace Prize's fucking reign of terror. That's what I projected. I projected once they got this area here and they started their fucking fracking, and they were able to push them back to a certain point just so they could access the fucking plane. And what they would do is go ahead and push all the way through and split the fucking resistance. It didn't really work out that way, luckily. And the people of Donbass maintained their fucking control of their nation. Or soon to be nation. Anyway, I thank you guys very much for your time. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.